I call this sermon, I Am, Therefore I Think. It's from John 15, 12 to 17. Switching those phrases means all the difference. And we're in John 15, 12 through 17. John 15, 12 through 17. Please stand for the reading of God's most holy word. I'm reading from the English Standard Version today. And verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another, because love is love. No. Oh, wait a minute. That you love one another as I have loved you, the definer and master of love. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another. Father in heaven, thank you for calling us friends. Turn our faces toward you, strip away our pride, teach us to abide. Let your light clear our vision and make theology become life. In Jesus' name, amen. What is a friend worth? Well, according to Jesus, a friend is worth your life. That's not sentiment. That's the cross. And if he laid down his life for his friends, then your value is not measured by your performance, your popularity, or your productivity. It is measured by the price that was paid. A friend is worth staying. A friend is worth suffering for. A friend is worth telling the truth to. And if Christ calls you a friend, then you are worth more than you have ever dared to believe you are. When I was a child, I thought of God as the great landlord in the sky. He owned everything. I rented space. He set the rules. I tried not to break them. He inspected the property. I hoped he would not find the damage that I did to it. That was my theology as a small child. Not heresy, just incomplete and immature. God as owner, me as tenant. He had rights, I had obligations. And that mindset produced something subtle but heavy within me. I related to him like management. Pay the rent. Don't cause any trouble. Try to keep the place clean. Hope you don't get evicted. That's not friendship. That's anxiety with paperwork. Then later in life, I moved into another image or idol of God that I had built. God was no longer the great landlord in the sky. He became the great Santa Claus in the sky. Not someone I feared inspection from, but someone I submitted requests to. I had a list. I'm sure you did too. Health, provision, open doors, closed doors, success, relief. Prayer became a delivery system for me then. If I behaved, maybe the good gifts would come. If I believed hard enough, maybe the package would finally arrive. That felt warmer than the landlord did, but it was still transactional. The landlord inspects, Santa rewards. Both keep God at a terrible distance. Both reduce him into something he is not. In one, I am the tenant. In the other, I'm the customer. But in neither am I friend. And it was there that God became something else to my young, developing mind. He became a tyrant. Life was hard at that point. My prayers for ease, they felt unanswered. I had moved from rent pain anxiety to gift request expectation. And when the gifts did not arrive, disappointment hardened into suspicion. If he is powerful and he does not give what I ask, then maybe he is withholding. Even as a child, that logic begins to form inside of you. It felt absurd in the small things like wishing for one more extra life in Pac-Man and not getting it. But that childish frustration grows up with you. It just becomes more sophisticated over time. One more opportunity, one more rescue, one more intervention, one more spared heartbreak. And when those don't come, well, the Santa image collapses. But something else rises in its place. If he can give and doesn't, then maybe, just maybe, he don't care. Or worse, maybe he enjoys it. That's how a wounded heart imagines tyranny from above. The landlord inspects, Santa rewards, the tyrant withholds. And all three kept God incredibly distant from me. But here's what I did not understand then that I do now. Unanswered comfort is not evidence of cruelty. It may be evidence of formation. A tyrant crushes you for control. A father crushes you for growth. A tyrant demands submission from you. A friend invites alignment with you. The difference is purpose. When Jesus speaks in John 15 about the pruning, he is not describing random hacking, random hardship. He is describing intentional shaping. Every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. We heard this last week, that it may bear more fruit. The tyrant wounds without explanation. The friend says, all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. The tyrant keeps subjects in the dark. The friend shares counsel. And slowly, painfully, I began to realize something astounding. The problem was not that God was a tyrant. The problem was that I was still imagining him as existing for the sole purpose of making my life easier. That is called source thinking. Stick with me. Source thinking. If I am the center, then God's job is comfort delivery. Period. But if I am image bearer, if I am not source being, then my life is not about ease. It is about alignment. And sometimes alignment feels a lot like loss before it feels like light. What I mistook for tyranny, was very often pruning. What I called neglect was sometimes protection. What I labeled silence was sometimes invitation into deeper mystery. A tyrant extracts. A friend lays down his life. And tyrants do not go to crosses for rebels. Friends do. That realization rewrote everything for me because I began to understand that my problem was not merely that I had misunderstood God, I had misunderstood everything, including myself. I had imagined myself as a renter. Then I imagined myself as a customer, and then I imagined myself in the heyday of today, a victim. But Scripture never calls me any of those things. It calls me the opposite of those things. It calls me image bearer. In the image of God, He created them. Now, that word can sound abstract and lofty and theological, but it's actually very, very, very simple. An image does not create the face. It reflects the face. A mirror does not generate light, it receives light. And somewhere deep in my young heart, I had assumed I was meant to generate something on my own. Peace, success, identity, control. I assumed I was meant to be strong enough. I assumed I was meant to be good enough, impressive enough, spiritual enough. And then I realized that's source thinking. But only one says, I am. That's source being. We are not that. We are spoken into being, held in being, sustained in being. And that is not a humiliation to us. It is a great relief to us. Because if I am the source, then everything rests on me. But if I am image, then I exist because he is. Simple as that. And slowly, this is where the shift began in my mental construction of the spiritual landscape. I realized something else. If I am an image, then relationship is not optional in the Christian faith. Images are meant to face something. A mirror turned toward darkness reflects nothing. A moon turned away from the sun goes dark. And when Jesus says in John 15, abide in me, he is not demanding performance out of us. He is inviting an orientation out of us. Turn toward the light. Stay there, remain there. And then he says something that used to feel sentimental to me, but now it feels seismic to me. I no longer call you servants, but friends. And here's where the pieces lock together. You cannot have covenant friendship with a machine. You cannot share counsel with a tool. You do not disclose your heart to property that you own. You do that with an image. When Jesus says, all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you, he is not lowering himself, he is restoring us. Friendship is not flattery. It is the restoration of the image to its proper orientation. And that was the aha moment for me. The reason he calls us friends is because we were made from the ground up to reflect him. We are Adam, the statue of the king in the garden. Friendship is what image looks like when it faces the light. We see this in ordinary life. Those who love one another begin to mirror one another. Long companionship aligns posture, speech, facial expressions. The more you dwell with someone, the more their patterns imprint upon you. That's not forced imitation. That's love reshaping likeness. That's friendship. And if that is true of our faulty human love, how much more so when the image turns towards the light it was made to reflect? Servants obey without understanding. They must. Friends understand because they share the life of the master. Image and friendship are not separated ideas. They are the same reality seen from two different angles. If I am image, then I was built for communion. If I am friend, then I am being restored to that image. And suddenly, the landlord disappeared. The Santa figure faded away. The tyrant collapsed. Because a tyrant crushes his rivals, a landlord inspects his property, and Santa distributes his goods, but a friend lays down his life to restore a reflection. And that changes everything. It means obedience is not rent. Prayer is not a wish list. Suffering is not cruelty. It is pruning for clarity of reflection, smoothing the surface of the glass. And the more that I face him, the more I begin to look like him. That's image. And the more I begin to understand his heart, the more obedience feels like alignment instead of fear. That's called friendship. And that orientation, day after day after day, year after year after year, turning again and again and again, as you turn away, turn back to him, began to restore the image. Not because I mastered Christian doctrine or theology, but because I stopped trying to reduce the Christian life to a moment at the altar. For many of us, especially over the last 100 years, faith was often presented to us as an event. Walk the aisle, pray the prayer, sign the card for our statistics, have the experience. And let me say clearly, those moments mattered. You were waiting, right? Those moments matter. Conversion is a real thing. Sanctification is a real thing. Justification is a real thing. There is a doorway to be walked through and a moment that you walk through it. There is a decisive crossing over from one life to the next. But people from different faith communities are shocked that I'm training the saints. They're used to an evangelistic message every single week. But somewhere along the way, we began to treat the doorway, the foyer of the house, as the entire house. We entered, and then we just stood around in the foyer. We can tell you the date we got saved. You know, I don't know the date I got saved. I've had people frown at me so big over that. Like I didn't have the little card next to me. I'm sorry. We can tell you the date we got saved. We can describe the service. We can defend the doctrine. We can point to the key in our hand. But we never really moved into the house. We live in a culture that doesn't dwell anywhere any longer. Nomads sitting still. We scroll instead of sit. We stream instead of stay. We consume instead of commune. And we brought that same restlessness into the church, into our faith. We checked in with Jesus here today. We didn't abide with Jesus. The house is ours, but we're still standing in the entryway. And image bearing cannot happen in the foyer. Friendship does not grow in the hallway of the house. It unfolds in the dwelling of the house. Jesus does not say, remember the day that you entered in. He says, abide in me. Remain in me. Stay oriented toward me. The branch does not live by remembering the grafting. It lives by the ongoing sap that the grafting provided. And slowly, very slowly, for I have a thick skull, I began to understand something that changed everything for me. Obedience was no longer about surviving inspection. It was about alignment with the King I love. I no longer obey Christ because I'm afraid of what he might do if I don't. I obey him because I agree with him with my entire being. I agree with his plans. I agree with his beauty. I agree with his way. I see the workability of his commands. At first, that agreement was intellectual. There was no high moment right then. I could look at his teachings and think to myself very clearly, even as a young person, if everyone lived this way, the world would actually function. Forgiveness instead of unending vengeance. Humility instead of, if you watch the awards show lately, these people need humility. Truth instead of manipulation, self-giving instead of self-protection. It made crystal clear sense to me. But understanding the beauty of his method is not the same as walking in it. That took years. Years of turning, years of drifting and recalibrating, years of suffering for him, years of discovering how much pride still dwelled within me. I began to see that pride and ego themselves were the main distortions within the receiver. The signal was clear, the light was steady, the cross had already settled the question of his character forever. But I was still slightly off-center. Pride says, I must produce, I must secure myself, I must understand everything, I must be the source. And ego resists the simplest truth in the universe. You are not the sun. You are the moon. You shine when he shines a light on you. You shine when you face the sun. As I kept walking with him, and like C.S. Lewis, I started behind a little lamb. 50 years later, he turned around and roared at me. As I kept walking with him, especially in suffering, something deepened within me. At first, I thought he was simply in the foxhole with me. It was good to have somebody there, present, close, steady. And that alone was enough to keep me from totally collapsing. But over time, I began to see something more in my foxhole friend. He wasn't merely in the foxhole. Oh, good Lord, he's leading the charge. And I wasn't clinging to him only for relief anymore. I was aligning myself underneath his banner. And that's when love matured into something even stronger. I found honor. I found glory, not mine, his. I found allegiance, and I found purpose for my life. I found courage that I did not know I possessed, and that only came through abiding with him, through turning again and again through the wheels and the cycles, through suffering that stripped down the ego, through losing the illusion that I had to be the source. And that is when the simplicity of it all became almost unbearable and overwhelming to me. The Christian life is not complicated. The Christian life is deep, but it is not complicated. You were never meant to generate your own light. You were never meant to compete with God for authorship of your story. You were meant to face him and follow him. That is it. Image bearers face the light. Friends remain with the one that they love. And whatever you face, you will begin to mirror whatever you face. Face what is good. So what are you facing? Career? Reputation? Fear? Comfort? Approval? Yourself? Because you will reflect what you dwell upon. It's not hard to see, is it? The distortion was never in him. Do you understand that? The distortion was never in him. The distortion was in our insistence on facing ourselves. But when you turn, not dramatically, not theatrically, just finally, honestly, and humbly, clarity returns to you in that moment just as surely as it did to that beast out in the field called Nebuchadnezzar. Prayer becomes no longer a wish list. It becomes a conversation throughout your day. Obedience becomes alignment with him. Holiness becomes family resemblance. Suffering becomes pruning, and theology becomes reality itself. You do not have to climb to God. You simply have to face God. You do not have to manufacture your own glory. You can reflect his. You do not have to secure your worth any longer. The cross already declared your worth for all time. You do not have to prove that you belong to anybody because he already called you friend. And when image and friendship finally become one within your understanding, when you realize that he calls you friend because you were made to reflect him, and he restores your reflection through abiding friendship, then pride, That old viney, nasty thing, pride, loosens its grip because you are no longer competing. You are no longer generating. You are simply receiving. You are no longer standing by yourself. You are now walking with a friend who laid down his life for you and now calls you into his purposes. And that orientation, day after day after day, turning after turning after turning, again and again and again towards him, becomes the most beautiful, simple, strong thing in the entire world. So remain with him and watch theology come alive. And here is the wonder of it all. He did not need to call us friends. He could have remained sovereign and distant. He could have remained king and demanded our compliance. He could have remained holy and untouchable, and we would still owe him everything. But he didn't. Instead of doing that, he stepped toward us, lowered the holy staff down to us. The one who said, I am, stepped into our dust. The source of all being, all life, all reality, the wellspring of everything, entered derivative flesh. The King of glory accepted a cross, not to recruit servants, to restore friends. Do you see the magnitude of that? A king can pardon subjects. A king may even reward loyalty. But a king who lays down his life to restore the dignity of image bearers and then invites them into the shared purpose, that's glory. That is honor, and that is friendship at its most true and honest level. And once you see him like that, once the distortion fades from your mind, once the idols come crashing down, pride loses its grip. Why would I cling to my tiny, pathetic little throne when I can stand underneath his royal banner? Why would I insist on being my own source when I can reflect godly glory? Why live in the foyer when I've been invited to the banquet table? Friendship did not diminish his kingship. Friendship revealed his kingship. Because only a true king can afford to call his people friends. Only a true king can lead from the front. And only a true king restores the image instead of crushing it. And when image bearing and friendship finally become one in your understanding, when you realize that you were made to reflect him and invited to walk beside him, then something rises in you that cannot be manufactured. Honor, courage, purpose, allegiance. And it wasn't because you were manipulated. It was because you have seen the King. And the King is good. So follow him. Abide with him. Definitely walk on into the house and sit at the table. Walk behind him, stand beside him, and let your life declare what your heart knows. Christ is King. Hail to the King.